Robert second. This is Jose from Zambia.
Hey, how about Jose? Yeah, how you
Second,
doing?
I'm fantastic, my brother.
Mm-hmm.
Last Tuesday, you recommended me to read the book Concentration,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm on it.
Sure.
I'm enjoying it, by the way. However, there's something that pop up that I keep seeing consistently on the books, which is on the concentration book, is on the verse 30, 48, 52.
Mm-hmm.
Because we understand, or we understand that no one wins the race in racism, correct?
Sure.
And we also say that Wu-Sabat is for everyone.
We don't say
So my question,
Wu-Sabat is for everyone. We say Wu-Sabat is for everyone who will accept it.
correct. Very
Right.
well put. Very well put.
Sorry, what verse were you looking at from concentration so I can be on your same
Is
page?
30, 48, and 52. But the question is simple. I think you can answer it without the book. Because my
Okay.
question is, why the books in general highlight the Coccozoids as Genin, the human devil, or bloodsuckers, as our culture is inclusive? This is a two-part question.
Okay.
Why the Coccozoid are constantly being called Genin, human devil, and bloodsuckers, and and how we, or what's the right approach to deal with them, knowing their disagreeable nature?
Okay, it's a good question. Um, the thing is that we're not it's not everyone, you see. So this is why words are very important. And you hear the term, whoever the caps fit, let them wear it. Because
Mhm.
if you're not somebody that is behaving and acting in that way, then that won't apply to you. Do you follow me? So,
Yeah.
for example, just because we say they're devils doesn't mean that they're the only ones that are devils. That's why the Masters got the scrolls. Are they black devils as well? Because it's a question to answer and put it to yourself and think, do you behave and act in a devilish way? And do you do
Mm-hmm.
devilish things? So what we're saying is, if you look at the nature of a being and the way they behave, if it applies to them, so when you say bloodsuckers, for example, you have to look at who or what is a bloodsucker. Then you think about Dracula as a being. And what does
Mm-hmm.
Dracula do? Dracula needs to suck the blood of a being to subsist, right? Then when you
Mm-hmm.
start to look on the planet and see who does that and go back to why somebody needs blood if they're not a vampire, right? You will go back and you start to look at things like, okay, Dracula is a story, just like Superman is a story, just like the whole Father Christmas is a story, but Dracula comes from beings that come from a constellation called Draco. And then Draco, Draco, ties into
Mm-hmm.
Draconians, right? Then you
Correct.
start to look at, right, when these Adamites were created, they are known as hemophiliacs. A hemophiliac is someone that their blood didn't clot. So if they cut themselves, they would bleed to death. So they
Mm-hmm.
had to get other people's blood or mix with them so that they can get the hemoglobin to make sure that, because the reason we heal when you cut yourself, you see, when you cut yourself, your body
Mm-hmm.
starts to knit itself back together, because when you get that scab or the scar, which when it basically rebuilds itself or reanimates, right? So now when you start to look at like things in history where you're dealing with vampires and dealing with beings that need blood, and then you go back to things like the War of the Roses, right? Which is a story about the European families, the Lancasters and the Yorks. And that whole story was about getting the blood. Even the slavery, what people consider slavery, was about the blood, because when you have that condition, every 400 years, right, you will die out unless you mix to sustain and keep your blood. You see what I mean? To be able to not die out. So what I'm saying is, like, the terms, and then you look at the biblical stories of these beings that are requesting blood all the time, blood sacrifices, blood to be sprinkled. So when what I'm basically saying, when you look at those terms and then apply it into the books, the nature, why does a person want to eat flesh like a steak with blood in it? But they call it rare, which
Rare,
means it's
yes.
not cooked properly. And you start to look at, where does that come from? It goes back to cannibalism, it goes back to vampires. You start to look at, like I said, the things in history, and even till this day, why, when you go for any medical condition that requires them to look at your blood or take a blood test, why do you need to give like 3 jars of blood when you only need a small amount of blood to look at it through the microscope to see what's in the blood? So
Mm.
then you start to say, what is the purpose of having blood banks, and what's happening to that blood, and why they ask for people to donate blood and give blood all the time? Because when you start to look at transfusions and transplants, when you take something foreign into you, your blood replenishes itself. So after a while, it's not going to last anyway, because it's not going to be compatible.
Compatible, yeah.
So you then have to start to take many pills, like, to maintain living for longer, because now that transplant eventually will not be compatible with you. So if you pick any of those names that you were saying, if you say killers, right? Okay, look in the history of the world and see who's the being that does that, going into wars, going into other people's territories and taking over. And
Mm-hmm.
like, you start to see, like, wow, like, it's consistent. So it's really at those beings or the people that act and behave in that way, you see. So they will give you the illusion that there's one person called the devil that has horns, that, is in a place called hell with a pitchfork, to
Mm-hmm.
basically distract your attention to what the word means, which is, it can, depending on which language you're coming from, it's a, someone who's false, or a false accuser, or a liar. And you start to look at, why do they lie to you? Who does the lying and why? You see, so it's not about pointing at any particular person, but when you do look at the Adamites, this is what they have done over the last 6,000 years, to the point where there's so much chaos on the planet, and now they're being removed. And that's been done by their overlords and our ancestors, who programmed their telomeres to expire after 6,000 years, to the point where the fertility rate is so low now that it's irreversible. You see, so there are actual facts to nature, natural nature, because certain things expire and have to become extinct at a particular time. So this is an inevitable thing. It's not something that can be reversed, because once judgment has been passed, there's an actual fact called no, it's a master secret, judgment on upon the Adamites. You see, because the Adamites were actually created as a food source for these beings that like to eat flesh, and these beings tying into, the Pleiadians that came from Taurus. These beings, were like, to the Draconians, stop eating us. We want to give you a substitute? And if we do, will you leave us alone? They were like, okay, give us a
Mhm.
sample. So they went about, grafting and making the Adamites for food. It's just that they don't know this because obviously amnesia, and it's been like a long time, 6,000 years, and now the truth is starting to be, told. And yeah,
Revealed.
so this is why we do say no one wins the race in racism, because actual facts and facts are facts. It's not about race or racism. The facts are the facts, and natural nature determines what happens. So did that answer your question? If not, then you have to probe further so we can elaborate if
I
needed.
think so. I think so. Well, because right at the beginning you mentioned that it's not about the race; it's about the disagreeable behavior,
That's
which
right.
can be, can come from anyone, literally. So it's pretty much clear on my side, and I will dive into this topic on the scroll that you suggested, the Master Secret
Yeah.
Judgments on the Adamites, and I'll pick it up from there. Thank you very much,
No
my brother.
problem. Every time. You're welcome.
Okay.
All right, Wadu.